Okay. I want to make sure we have enough time today. So let's go ahead and get started. And as folks filter in this morning, we'll continue to admit our attendees, but definitely want to get us started off. So good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone joining us today from wherever you are. Welcome to our virtual event, Resistance: Why Are Women's Rights Still a Struggle?, featuring two of the Secretary of State's 2022 International Women of Courage, Carmen Gheorghe of Romania, president of E-Romnja, a Romanian NGO that promotes the rights of Roma women, and Doina Gherman of Moldova, a member of the Moldovan Parliament who has championed women's inclusion efforts and the protection of survivors of domestic and gender-based violence in her country. Today's program will be moderated by Dr. Sally Kitch, author and Regents Professor of Women's Studies at Arizona State University. My name is Kristen Allen, and I am the Executive Director of Global Ties Arizona, a Phoenix-based nonprofit organization, community-based member of the Global Ties US National Network, and a World Affairs Council of America. At Global Ties Arizona, we are proud to partner with the US Department of State and national program agencies to implement the International Visitor Leadership Program, bringing in hundreds of international leaders to the Arizona market to interact with our community leaders and members, exchange ideas and information, and create lasting ties in efforts to advance diplomacy around the world. I would also like to sincerely thank our sponsors and supporters, the Salt River Project, Workplace Resolutions LLC, Northern Arizona University, and Maricopa County Community College District, and Daniel Schweiker for their support to help us bring these international opportunities to our community. As shared just a moment ago, today we are very much honored to virtually host two of the 12 2022 International Women of Courage. These 12 women were recognized by Secretary of State Antony Blinken and First Lady Jill Biden in an official awards ceremony on March 14th. The ceremony can be viewed on the State Department's website, which I will share in the chat box in just a moment. Now in its 16th year, the Secretary of State's International Women of Courage Award recognizes women from around the world who have demonstrated exceptional courage, strength, and leadership in order to bring about positive change to their communities, often at great personal risk and sacrifice. Typically, our awardees would participate in an in-person visit to the United States, beginning in Washington, D.C., and then visiting their counterparts in cities across the country. Due to the pandemic, the program has taken place virtually this year, though we are very, very grateful to the U.S. Department of State and to our national program partner, Meridian International Center, for the opportunity to be a part of the program this year virtually. Ms. Gherman and Ms. Gheorghe have participated in a series of meetings at both the federal level and others in Arizona over the last couple of weeks. In our community, they have met with our community partners, Chicanos por la Causa, the Arizona Alliance for Community Health Centers, the Morning Star Leaders Initiative, and have also met with our female elected leaders, Arizona Senator Raquel Tehran and City of Phoenix Councilwoman Yasemin Ansari. Today's meeting, as you can see, is taking place in a Zoom meeting format, and those in attendance would just ask you to keep your microphone muted throughout the program. At the Q&A section, you'll have the opportunity to unmute yourself to ask questions or make comments to our speakers today. And you can also share your questions in the chat box throughout, and we will make note and get to as many as we can. We are recording the first part of today's program, but we'll cease recording at the Q&A section. I would now like to take the opportunity to introduce our esteemed moderator for today's program, Dr. Sally Kitch, who will introduce our International Women of Courage honorees and begin the virtual conversation. Dr. Sally Kitch is a university and Regents Professor of Women and Gender Studies in the School of Social Transformation at Arizona State University. She is also a distinguished sustainability scientist in ASU's Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory and the founding director of both the Institute for Humanities Research and the Humanities Lab at ASU. Dr. Kitch is the author of 7 books, 3 of which have won national prizes, and has written scores of articles and book chapters. She specializes in cultural theory, including gender ideology in the US and Afghanistan, feminist theory, ecofeminism and environmental humanities, and women's history. I am very pleased to pass the virtual microphone to Dr. Sally Kitch.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and definitely a pleasure to be here with these esteemed visitors and guests. I will call everyone's attention to the title of today's talk or today's visit. It's "Why is it still so hard to work for women's rights? Why is it still a struggle?" And I think with that framework in mind, we have to recognize how many women around the world, including our two speakers today, have been working tirelessly to make a difference in women's lives. But it has taken not just decades, not just years, it has taken centuries for women to get to the point where they can still be fighting for their rights. And that's one of the things that I'd like everybody to think about as we learn about these speakers and hear what they have to say. I'm going to introduce them both, and each of them is going to make some introductory remarks after my introduction. So first, I'd like to introduce Doina Gherman, who has served in the Moldovan Parliament since 2019. She told me that she decided she was going to run for parliament because she was inspired by a female politician in her country. And she decided it when her twins were 1 year old. So on top of the many achievements that she's had, she's also been willing to take her personal life, put it aside, or incorporate into it the fight for women's rights. She's had amazing accomplishments. She's championed efforts to promote women's inclusion and protect survivors of domestic and gender-based violence. She's deputy chair of the Party of Action and Solidarity in her country, head of her party's women's organization. She chairs Parliament's Foreign Policy and European Integration Commission, and she previously served in the Parliament's Human Rights Commission. Before entering Parliament, she worked as an inspector in Moldova's Customs Service and taught communication and branding at the Institute of Sciences and Education. Ms. Gherman earned a master's degree in management from the Moldovan Academy of Public Administration and a bachelor's degree in foreign languages from Balti State University. She speaks Romanian, Russian, French, and English. She wanted us to know as well that in the recent years, the number of women in Parliament has increased dramatically from 3 to 41, and that the reason for that is because of a quota system that she helped to institute in her country in both federal, national, and local elections. So please, Doina, give us a few words.
Thank you for the presentation. Good evening to everybody. In Moldova is evening, by the way. So I am very proud of my country. Moldova is a small country, but with a very big heart. And I am very inspired of Moldova's women, of our president, Maia Sandu, the first ever elected president, as a woman elected president in our country. And moreover, we have a woman prime minister, and this beautiful tandem of two women in leadership, in important leadership positions in our country is an international brand now. And it inspires many countries in European Union to participate. It inspires the girls, it inspires other women to get involved in social, political, and economical life as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are you still speaking? I'm sorry.
No, thank you.
All right, okay. I'd now like to introduce Carmen Gheorghe. Since 2013, Carmen has been president of E-Romnja, an NGO that promotes Roma women's rights. She introduces herself as a Roma feminist and activist. She also worked from 2008 to 2019 as a project manager, expert and trainer on LGBTQ plus gender and Roma issues for several NGOs in Romania, including the Impuena Agency for Community Development, the Roma Education Fund, the LGBTQTI plus rights, NGO Accept, the Center for Education and Human Rights, and the Resource Center for Roma Communities, a spin-off organization of the Open Society Foundation. Prior to this, Dr. Gheorghe worked as an expert for the National Agency for Roma, a government agency in charge of developing policies for Roma communities. She has a bachelor's degree in public administration, a master's degree in gender studies, yay, and a PhD in political science from the Bucharest-based National School of Political Science and Public Administration. This year, she is also a fellow with the Ashoka Foundation, and maybe she'll tell us a little bit more about that. Please, Carmen.
Thank you, Sally, Dr. Sally, for introducing me. I'm not very sure what I should say within the introduction, as I think there is, a lot of stuff what I do, but also what I'm advocating for. And I think it's very important to mention that in the last 10 years, I've been founding E-Romnja, which is a Roma feminist NGO, and I've been struggling in a collective way with a lot of Roma women that, of course, unfortunately, they're not always here to show that this is a collective fight that we are running to make our cause more visible, as we suffered for many years for, historically oppression and invisibility and underrepresentation and a lot of other issues that probably we will talk later more about. Just to say that I'm very honored to receive an award, but also very humbled when I'm thinking of all the struggle that a lot of other Roma women activists and feminists have run before me and maybe they didn't have the same chance or luck.
Maybe you could tell us what are the special concerns of Roma women and how they might differ from the concerns of other groups.
Roma is one of the largest ethnic population in Europe. It counts about 12 million people. And we have our historical background comes all the way from India and ended up in Europe in the 11th century. And of course, from here in different parts, there is a long history related to Roma, and in many parts they are known and named as Gypsies, Gitanos, Singaras, Manush, Kale, etc., travelers, nomads. And our history is very diverse, very colorful, but our history also contains a lot of oppressive moments, such as slavery in Southeastern Europe, or as victims and survivors of the Holocaust, and also of different political regimes that we've been through. So, and particularly in Romania, the country that I live in, where Roma were slaves for 500 years. So it's also, I think Romania and US has this common history that unfortunately in our country, it's still not recognized.
Mm-hmm. And how do women's issues differ from the issues of Roma men?
I think as any ethnic group or racialized group, there is a lot of struggle within the group and outside. And of course, we as women deal with sexism, with patriarchy, with homophobia and transphobia, with a lot of class issues. But all this, of course, is always coupled and doubled by the interaction with the outside. What we as Roma people we call them Gaje world or Gaje people. So the conflicts and the tensions within the ethnic group and outside the group are something that I think it makes our situations specific, but also common to all women which have an ethnic background or a racialized background.
Thank you. While we have a couple of minutes, maybe I can also ask Doina if she could articulate the specific issues for women that you have been working on. Inclusion, obviously, is one of them, but is there something about Moldova that is unique in terms of women's issues and rights struggles?
So probably the terrifying reality about or concerning domestic violence is the most important issue that I consider it's important to move on. And that is why we ratified the Istanbul Convention, and now starting with the 1st of May, we are ready as a state officially to be on the side of victims of domestic violence. 1 of 3 women in our country are daily abused, harassed, and beaten in their own homes. So that is why it is very important to have a real infrastructure for all the victims, because we need more centers for these women in Moldova. So,
go ahead.
So, first of all, we need to help the women from the rural areas, because the situation in the districts and the regions of our country is more complicated than here in the capital, in Chisinau. And through the new provisions of implementation of Istanbul Convention, we will have even modifications in the penal code, in the contraventional code. So it is a direct mechanism to help the women. And I am very proud that our country became the 35th state of the Council of Europe that ratified the Istanbul Convention. Romania as well ratified, and congratulations, Carmen, for your parliament and for your government.
Yes, congratulations. I wonder if you would each respond to the question that is the framework for our session today. Why are women's rights still such a struggle? Would you like to start, Carmen?
I would say that, you know, when it comes to women, and I would also want to emphasize this, that when it comes to women, there are so many layers and intersectional battles that we have to run, and we have to, you know, have all our lives. And feminism is a bad word. Racism is a denied word, especially in Europe. And then, of course, homophobia or other forms of, hatred are also many times justified, you know, through some lens. And I think as long as we continue to have a lot of negative portraits on women, and especially on women which have an ethnic background or racialized background, or Latino women, I think we will continue to struggle. If we look at the historical moments of the lack of representation of our history, of our history as women, as ethnic, it makes a lot of sense that today we still struggle, you know, to have better better jobs, be better paid. I don't know, to unveil and to deconstruct this idea that, you know, we are designed to do the housework and also have a profession, that we as women, if we retire, it is more likely to live more in poverty. It makes a lot of sense if you look in the history that the public state would always design programs which where they fund health issues related to men and not women. And of course, I don't even want to mention the struggles that we have to have, and Doina already mentioned, the gender-based violence, human trafficking, and because Doina mentioned that Romania adopted the Istanbul Convention, I think 6 or 7 years ago, but you all should know that we are struggling since 10 years to have a better legislation, better services, better shelters, and the political will. So, you know, the idea that why we are still struggling today, it's still very much connected to our historical moments, oppressive historical moments, invisibility that we have continue to have underrepresentation, and also the fact that the world is still pretty much dominated by white men in power position, where they will build this, where they will build the structures, you know, designed to address mainly, you know, men, unfortunately. And I know that also in Europe we have some models of countries where you know, you have better quotas, you have better representation for women, you have a social state which really provides and takes care of the people. But I think we are a lot of, you know, communities and a lot of states still fail to provide this. So that's why our struggles are still here.
Thank you. Doina.
So I'll give you a concrete example from our political Moldovan life. So my president, Maia Sandu, in 2 weeks before the elections day in 2020, was heavily attacked for not having a family and for not having children. And it was like a huge mass media attack on her, and it was unprecedented for our country. And they were saying, she is not a mom, she even doesn't have a family at her 48 years, how she could rule a country. It is inadmissible for us as a society. And everybody, or many skeptic voices were saying that our country is not ready for electing a woman as a president. But we've showed and we demonstrated, even if we have this patriarch society still in Moldova, we've showed that our country was more than ready to elect a first ever woman as a president. On the other hand, me being a politician, I have a family, I have 3 children, and they say, whoa, you are an irresponsible mom, so you should stay at home and your place is near your children and not in politics. How could you, or how can you? So you see that it is still very complicated to be a woman implicated in a public life, in the political life. And of course, as Carmen mentioned, the patriarchal stereotypes that are still very strong, the double burden of women in everyday life, and of course, the fear of the personal security. Because speaking about political life, it is very so scaring for many of women, because they are usually subjected to personal attacks, and we have a lot of reports. So most of the candidates who are attacked during the electoral campaigns are women. That's why we should continue our fight for women's rights and for women's opportunities, and we should stay in solidarity, of course.
Yeah, thank you both. Those are great answers. And I see in the chat that someone is mentioning the word that neither one of you mentioned, but I think is really key to what you're saying, which is masculinity and the definitions of masculinity and the way that some men see all women as competitors, and that anything women achieve somehow deprives them of masculinity or emasculates them. And that seems to be a fear or a dread or a value that doesn't go away very easily. So I think that's another thing that you're sort of saying indirectly. I have a couple more questions for both of you. We'd like to hear more about what inspired each of you to take up for the fight for women and gender rights in your countries. Carmen, could you start us off?
You know, for me, it was quite normal to get engaged in what I'm doing as an activist, as I come from an oppressed group, growing in Romania, where people call you nicknames, where people already have a lot of faces and profiles for you. And this kind of nicknames and words that were addressed to me were not, were confronting to the reality of my life, my community, my family. And these were two kind of words which I could not, understand very well why people react like this, why people can be so hatred. And in the same time, when I look at my family and my community and women that I grew up with, and they are my models of inspiration, of working class women, simple, but with strong values that they believed in. And these two words didn't cope with. And in the beginning, I have to admit that I was doing 20 years ago, I was doing a lot of work to convince the Gheorghe people that we Roma women are contributors, we are good women, working hard, having values, etc., etc. And I realized after some years that this was a trap, because racism, it doesn't have logical, rational reasons. And I was concentrating too much on justifying myself and proving that we are good people instead of working with my community. And then, of course, I took a shift in my work and started to focus on the people that I belong to, in a way. Also, because I thought I'm thinking that this here creates a strong space where you can speak about your traumas, you can speak about your experiences, you can maybe find some healing things that you could not find in the society. So it came from a lot of rage and injustice, of not being seen, heard, and not having a position as I grew up with.
Doina.
So, of course, my huge inspiration was our president, Maya Sandu. So I saw her for the first time in 2015 at a TV program. So for Moldova, it was probably the most complicated period ever, because Moldova was at that time under an oligarchic regime, a corrupt regime. And it was like unbelievable that we could have a democratic pro-European path then. And Maya Sandu appeared, so a small woman, but very courageous, and she created this new political party, Action and Solidarity Party. And she said to everybody who believe in justice and who want to be with her in this beginning, so just come to the building of the party and just sign and become a political member. And at that moment, I thought, is it that simple, just to become a political member? And I thought I should try, probably, being on a maternity leave with my twins. They were 1 year at that time. And I just went one day at the Action and Solidarity address party, and I just signed that request of becoming a political member. And it was like, wow, everybody who wanted to be involved, they just were active and helped with what they could. And in such a manner, we've become the biggest political party in the country. Now we have the presidency, the government, and the majority, a historic parliamentary majority in the parliament. So it's for the first time when a pro-European right-wing party had 63 mandates from 100 in our parliament. So it is an example of how a woman, great woman, can inspire a whole country. In 2016, she just lost the elections because she was a candidate to the presidential elections as well. And she lost the elections with a difference of 2%, but she didn't give up, never. So in 2020, she had the same candidate, the same pro-Russian candidate in Moldova, and she won with a difference of like 14%. Wow. So she did it, and she is very, very inspiring every day. So that is why it is extremely important to have more women politicians involved every day and be active to inspire other women and girls.
That is a very inspiring story, and I can see why she would be a person who would have influence over you and the whole country. So bravo. I would also like if you could, each of you, talk about the particular obstacle, maybe the worst obstacle that you faced in the work that you've done. Again, we'll start with Carmen.
The biggest obstacle was in the beginning to talk about Roma women issues, you know, because when you come from such an underprivileged group, nobody is expecting, and especially no woman is expecting that somebody is asking her, what are your needs? What are your issues? And when I started to go to work 15 years ago and traveling to different Roma communities, I was always speaking with Roma women. And of course, you know, because you mentioned earlier the masculinity, there were, you know, within the community, there were always a lot of men requiring that we should speak with them, and our focus was with women. So it was in a way a strange curiosity approach for everybody, you know, in the community, but it was also something very new, as I learned in time that a lot of women which struggle with structural inequalities and extreme poverty, I learned that it's very difficult for them to speak about their own issues. They would speak rather about the community, infrastructure, you know, institutional racism. They will speak about their family needs, children, husband, etc. But not about them. They would be on the bottom of the list if you would ask them, what do you want? What do you think? And this was really a process also for me to learn and to understand this, as I was much more younger in this age, and I was really, coming with a lot of theoretical points of view and ideas, and they were actually not fitting to the realities. So the first obstacle was actually to speak with women about their own needs and to go through this boundary, to go through this, wall. And then, of course, you have a lot of, obstacles when you work with people which are very poor, and you work in an intersectional way, because we look at the class, we look at the, gender identity, we look at the age gap or the disability, or, rural versus urban, etc. So from all these kind of, criteria and identities comes a lot of challenges, how to address them all. Should you speak about access to infrastructure, or should you speak about health and reproductive rights? Is it more important to address gender-based violence, but when you go to the police and to file a complaint, police will tell you, you Roma people go home because it's in your own culture to beat yourself, and then you are sorting everything out without us interfering, So obstacles came from all these, like, also community, but also a lot of institutional struggle that we had. And we are still, I'm still confronting with a lot of institutional racism, which is now more subversive, more hidden, very well hidden, but still, you have to know how to touch it and to address it, to unveil it, because it's somehow, I feel that after 20 years of working, I feel that this is even more dangerous in my work. I cannot even say this out loud, because people would say, no, we have protocols, we have a code of ethics, we have this, we have nothing against nobody, we treat everybody the same. But when you speak, in this universal way of human rights, you always hide a lot of oppressive systems. So there's a lot of struggle, and also working in an intersectional way, it's really a lot of struggle and challenging. But in the end, it's it gives you a lot of insights.
Thank you. That's really, really interesting. I think other marginalized groups in the US in particular struggle with the same thing. Is it that women's rights sometimes seem to conflict with the rights of the racial group or the ethnic group, and women feel like they have to suppress their own needs in order to fight for the larger group. And in the end, they end up, being victims within their group of various kinds of discriminations. So Doina, what about you? Big obstacle.
So the obstacles and the challenges as a politician are big, and daily we face them, especially now with the war began in Ukraine, and as Moldova is here in the region, we have to deal now with a huge humanitarian crisis, and it's for the first time that Moldova faces such an experience. More than 100,000 of refugees from Ukraine fleeing from the war are hosted in Moldova now, and half of them most of them are women and children, and half of them are minors. So 47,000 of refugees are children. So there are a lot of challenges every day, because if at the first stage we were concentrated here to help with the basic needs, so food, transportation, accommodation, now we should socially integrate these people. There are daily reports at the Ministry of Internal Affairs about the traffic of women. So we have cases of traffic of children, gender-based violence, So it is extremely important to monitor as a state, as a parliament, as the government, all the situation and to be on board with everything. Here in the parliament, of course, the challenges are different, because if speaking about projects of law or promoting them, it's not that easy, because you should just convince your colleagues firstly in the fraction, yeah, and then to convince the opposition. So it is more and more complicated. Because even if speaking about the double quota system, it was not that popular, especially among the men, because it was like a very new experience for them, and they understood that in fact it was about their places, because they were very smart, you know. We had a quota system in Moldova, and our electoral code said that the political party should have minimum 40% of both sexes on the electoral list. And they were just putting on the first, for example, 40 places men, and the women 40% at the bottom of the list. And here you are, so we had not a good situation. So that's why when we doubled the quota system, and we said very clearly that we should have minimum 40% of both sexes in each 10 places. So 10 places, minimum 40, 10 places, minimum the second 10, and it was, the resistance was very, very high, you know, very high, because they just were very afraid losing, you know, like their places. But we did it, and it was probably the most complicated project of law in my life. But we've succeeded, and I'm very proud that due to this project of law, now we have a historic number of MPs, women in the parliament, and in 2023 we will have more mayors and local councillors at the local public administration level. Thank you.
Brava again. Another word that neither of you quite said, but I think does characterize the obstacles that you've just described, is the question of power. That women's rights are about men's power, or at least often from a male perspective, that power seen as a finite resource, and that if somebody gets more power, then that means other people get less, instead of the idea that power is an infinitely expanding pie, if you will, and that we can empower lots of people and still maintain power for all. And that's been a very difficult concept, I would say, throughout history. And so thank you for showing excellent examples of how this works, both within a group and between groups, as we look out on the political landscape. You've both given us great examples. I wanted to ask Carmen very quickly, you have a range of activities that you do, including sexual rights as well as women's rights. Could you describe the relationship in your mind among those various projects that you undertake?
I don't think I quite understand. Can you elaborate a bit on this?
Well, you struggle. You work on women's rights, but you also work on LGBTQI TI plus rights. And I wonder if how you see the interconnection among those. Of course, gender and sexuality play a role in both, but I wonder as you go forward and do your work, is there some particular focus or link that you work on in your mind?
You know, I think the LGBT plus issues within the Roma community as well as in the society have especially in Southeastern country, has been quite a topic, especially in the last 5 years. And I think this kind of debate and the fact that in different European countries, you have different civil rights for LGBT people, it also supported the movement in our countries, in the Southeastern countries. And Romania is a typical example where, for example, in 2017, Romanian government at that time wanted to change the constitution and state very clearly that the marriage union has to be just between a man and a woman. So, of course, you know, a lot of us as activists really jumped in and started to organize, make allies, do a lot of community work, and also to, you know, campaign against this bill that was going to be approved unless civil society would gather its sources. And what I learned, not just from this experience, but in general as an activist and as a feminist, is that, because you talked also about power, I think I learned that we as underprivileged groups, we will never have enough power and enough voice unless we get more allies also from underprivileged groups. So as a feminist, you know, strategically and also ideologically, for me, it's very normal that I intersect with the LGBT, and I also try to address this issue within my own community, where you also have, you know, homophobia and everything. And for example, we work with in E-Romnja, the organization that I lead, we work with a lot of religious Roma women group. And within this religious group, we managed to bring the LGBT issue. And still in the beginning, it was a big tension, but, you know, slowly people will start to understand if you address it in a way, not that people have to accept it, but to respect it. So this, I think, was the approach. On one side, to work with NGOs and get more allies and activists. And then on the other side, to also work with our own communities.
Thank you. We are out of time for this section of our discussion, and we are ready to open up the questioning to our audience.